Welcome back this week. This episode is going to knock your socks off, my babes. So, if you are one of my listeners that has noticed in your journey with considering divorce that you seem to have moments of feeling like you're up and things are going well and life is manageable and you feel good and the relationship is okay and like, all right, this is life's good. And then moments where you are really, really down, moments where you feel overwhelmed, big feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and like it's never going to get better. Maybe feeling like you're a kid again, but this time you're in an adult body with adult responsibilities and the like crushing, overwhelming dread at that. Like, holy shit, I am an adult in charge of all these other people and things, and yet I feel absolutely unqualified to do that. Most of all, these cycles that you might be noticing, where there are periods of time where you feel like you are on top of the world. You have it all together. Maybe you are killing it at work, or you're volunteering at your kids' schools and you feel good and connected. And those are contrasted with these moments where you feel out of control and go into these really deep, dark, emotionally overwhelming places. If this sounds like you, this episode is going to change your life today. Because what you may very well be experiencing is complex post traumatic stress disorder, also known as CPTSD. And if you listening to this don't know what that is or haven't already listened to my previous episode on it, I highly recommend potentially pausing this and going and listening to my original episode, episode 11 on CPTSD. Another episode that you may want to consider as well will be episode 60. And that episode, I talk about a concept that is really going to be the heart of this episode, which is this analogy that I have around CPTSD and it being these rooms in our internal psychological house, and how when we have CPTSD emotional flashbacks, we get taken kind of back into these rooms. And sometimes, especially if we don't know that we have CPTSD and we don't have tools to manage it, we don't know how to get out of those rooms. And like being trapped in a nightmarish fun house, y'all, this can be so terrifying and difficult psychologically and can have massive impacts on your day-to-day life, month-to-month life, year-to-year life. So, for those of you that have been listening to the podcast for a while, you all know that learning about my CPTSD, it's been over a year and a half now, and starting to share it openly with the people that are close to me and intentionally managing it has by far, out of all of the tools and concepts that I have learned, all of it, y'all, my entire breadth and depth of the knowledge that I have learned in my past, 7 years of my journey with therapy and coaching and getting divorced and coming to understand myself better. CPTSD work has been the most life-changing shift for me in this entire journey. I am such a huge proponent of understanding it. If it resonates with you, if you end up seeing it in yourself, learning how to manage it, because it is an absolute game changer. So with that said, let me lay out for y'all what we're going to cover in this episode. First off, I am going to end up answering two questions that I actually left unanswered in episode 60. So back in episode 60, I presented two questions that at the time it was so fresh in this new idea I had about the rooms and the way they relate to CPTSD that I was like, hey, at some point in the future, I will come back to this. Well, here we are today. We're coming back to it. And the first question will be, how do we go into these rooms? Okay. And the second will be, how do I work with these parts of myself and heal the pain that is stuck? in these rooms. And don't worry, we're going to dive deeper into what the rooms are. I'm going to give you a little refresher around that as we really get into the heart of the episode. After I answer those two questions, we are then going to dive into 3 of my recent real life examples, which I am so excited to share with you all because I really, in my opinion, this is some of the most like in-depth material that I've ever heard described around what an emotional flashback can look like, feel like. And I'm really going to go in depth with not only how they get triggered, what it feels like going through it, but specifically with each of those examples, I am going to share 3 tools that I use the most for managing and working through my own emotional flashbacks. I also, as an awesome extra on this episode, when I come to the final tool, which little surprise peek is going to be EFT tapping, I am actually going to include in the extra show notes that will be available over on my Substack for my paid subscribers. I'm going to include the exact EFT tapping protocol that I created from this flashback that I'm going to be sharing, that ChatGPT created for me. That, I can't take much credit besides telling it, holy shit, I'm losing my mind. Create this up for me. And the reason I'm doing that is because you'll be able to see how I prompted it. And with that EFT tapping protocol format, you'll then be able to set up your own tailor-made thread with ChatGPT to be able to use it whenever you need to as well for yourself. With that said, let me dive in first with a little refresher on CPTSD and on this analogy that I have around the rooms. Okay. And to do that, we have to remember a couple of things. First off, trauma from our childhood is real. And it does not magically go away just because we become adults. I don't know about y'all, but nobody in my family growing up discussed this. This was not understood. This was not talked about. I really grew up thinking, once you become an adult, you just have it all figured out and life goes smoothly because you've magically, grown up. You're no longer a kid. But what I see over and over, just repeatedly in my own life, in my clients' lives, is that trauma has a real and lasting impact. And we're not even talking just like capital T trauma, what most people think of, like, oh, my parent died, or oh, I was, in my instance, I was molested by my father, like, capital T trauma. No, we're talking also like lowercase t traumas, the like slow perpetual drip on a psyche that can come from parents who are emotionally immature, who don't know how to regulate or show up or be a secure attachment for you. It may not look big and dramatic, but it still has an effect on your psyche. And so much so that this trauma literally becomes programmed into our internal psychology. It is a part of us. Second thing to remember is often our most powerful beliefs can end up being formed through our trauma. Okay. And finally, these beliefs, when they get formed, become rooms in the mansion of our mind. So I want to take you back in episode 60. In that previous episode, I shared this analogy, this new idea that I had kind of come up with of thinking of our internal landscape as a mansion with all of these different wings. And in all of those different wings, there being hundreds of different rooms. And at any point in our daily life, our consciousness can get activated and end up going into various rooms that exist in the mansion of our psyche. Okay. And in that episode, I highly recommend like going back and re-listening to it. Seriously, y'all, it's like from minute 6 to, if you want to like fast forward minute 6 to minute 24 of that episode, it will really take you deeper into everything I was kind of explaining around that analogy and give you just a little deeper dive into that. But where I want to take you from here is, okay, so we understand we've got this wing in our mind, in our mansion, in our mind, perhaps an entire wing that was kind of built out maybe by our religion, or another wing that was built out by our parents. And within each of these, we have all of these different rooms. Now, a key piece that I want you to understand in the way that I think about these rooms is that, contrary to where I think a lot of people get confused around CPTSD, and a few of you have even mentioned it when you're like, what exactly is an emotional flashback? It would be easy to mistake and think that when you're emotionally flashing back, you're actually like going into this past room from your childhood, that you're actually, thinking about the specific experience that happened way back when that initial belief formed. And although I can do kind of some of that work often with my clients where we do identify the initial creation of that room, what I find happens way more often and very subconscious, like in our daily lives, those of us that have CPTSD, is that these rooms, when they get triggered, it's not like you're necessarily traveling to the past in the function of it, as much as you are traveling to the past in your perspective in the moment. So let's say one of the rooms in your mind palace, mind mansion, is a room that on the door, the belief says, I have to do everything on my own. Okay. When in your daily life now, in the present day, something triggers you around that belief and you end up opening that door and stepping in, it's not like you're actually going back to that previous memory. Instead, it's like as you step through that door, glasses are put on to your face that create a lens, a distortion, a filter that you are now viewing your present day reality through. So the way I think of it is like when you walk into these rooms, it's not like you're walking into your past life. You are just walking into a different version of your current reality that is shaped by this belief. So now in this room, you're still living in your everyday life, but you're not realizing that you are actually in a room wearing glasses, seeing everything through the lens of, I have to do everything on my own. And why this is such a big deal is because when you go into that room and you put on those lenses, you can end up experiencing a completely different version of your reality than you were just before the trigger and the CPTSD flashback occurred. And you often don't realize that you are in this room because what you're seeing in the room is just your current reality. But in your subconscious, you are seeing it with this different lens of belief that is now coloring everything you see. And when you have this lens on, it can literally change your entire experience of the world around you, so much so that you see the people in it differently, you think of yourself differently, and from all of that, you end up behaving differently and interacting differently. That is how insanely powerful these rooms, the lens in the room are kind of the same idea, but I needed you to think of it as a lens so that you understand you're still viewing your everyday reality. You're just not realizing that you have this lens on, that you have somehow walked into a room in your mind palace that has a subconscious belief that is now flavoring everything you're seeing. And as I will illustrate later on in the episode, y'all, and thankfully, because most of these examples are so fresh, I will be able to break down in detail what that experience actually feels like. Y'all are getting really lucky. I just had like a lot of massive flashbacks over the last month. And because I am so fascinated by CPTSD and so interested in it, I was able to, coming off of them, really analyze and understand, in a way that I haven't before, what was actually happening there. Okay, so I'm really hoping that that was clear as mud for y'all. For sure, if you guys are like still super confused about the rooms, drop a comment, on this episode, and I will try to do maybe an extra bonus episode where I can wrap my tongue around it a little easier. But hopefully we've got the basics down, right? This idea that we have multiple different rooms inside of us formed by our different beliefs. Those beliefs can often, some of them, be rooted in our trauma, and that when you have CPTSD and something triggers you, that trigger can end up leading to you stepping into a room, metaphorically placing on lenses, glasses onto your eyes that have a certain color lens that then you see everything around you through. And that you often don't know that you are doing this because it's often very subconscious. But when you do, you then start existing as if you are living in these rooms rather than the rooms of your adult, grounded, regulated self. Because CPTSD rooms, emotional flashbacks, they take us back into feelings of hopelessness and helplessness that aren't actually real and related to our adult self as much as they are what we felt like in childhood or in these past rooms that were built back then. Now, I want to dive into the two questions I left unanswered in that previous episode, episode 60. So, the first question I had brought up was, how do we go into these rooms? Okay. And I've already mentioned it a couple times, right? I've said when we get triggered, but I've also noticed, I want you to think of it as two different ways. So, the first and biggest way